Hanselminutes.com, it's Hanselminutes, a weekly discussion with web developer and technologist Scott Hanselman. This is Lawrence Ryan, announcing show number 179, recorded live Friday, September 11th, 2009. Support for Hanselminutes is provided by Telerik RAD Controls, the most comprehensive suite of components for Windows Forms and ASP.NET web applications. Online at www.telerik.com. In this unusual episode of Hanselminutes, organized late night over Twitter and recorded as a community conference call, Scott moderates a discussion on open source and the new Codeplex Foundation.
Hi, this is Scott Hanselman, and this is another episode of Hanselminutes. And this is an interesting episode of Hanselminutes as we have spent the last 1 hour trying to record this episode. We tried it on Ustream, I tried it on DimDim, I tried it on TinyChat, and now we're trying it on a thing called TalkShoe, which TalkShoe.com. Honestly, I think I should have just tried my gut reaction, which was livemeeting.com. Instead, I did not, and I tried this. People are having all sorts of trouble with managing a conference call of this size. I've got a number of people called in, though, here on the TalkShoe, and I've got this very strange interface from the 90s. I've just unmuted Scott C. Reynolds. Are you there, Scott?
I'm here.
Isn't this thrilling? This TalkShoe.com. What do you think of this?
This is like the wave of the future. I'm telling you.
Are you serious? A web-based conference calling management system? Do you think this is how we should do this thing?
No, I don't.
Yes, this is deeply not working for me. I think a live meeting probably would be the best thing. The idea is that I want to record a podcast, and I want people to call in live. I think that Jeff Atwood, Coding Horror, has a really nice system where he's got people calling in to basically a voice recorder, like a voicemail, and then he plays the WAV file of those people who've called in over the course of the last week, and then he answers them. I don't know. That's one system, but I don't know if it's necessarily the right system. Let me see if we got Scott Barnes and get him unmuted here. This is a strange little interface we've got where I actually click on somebody and I wait like 10 seconds and then they get unmuted. Scott, are you there? Other Scott? There's 3 Scotts right now. Scott Barnes?
Yeah, I'm on the iPhone.
Okay, so if we've got our 3rd Scott who's logged in on an iPhone, a Microsoft employee, that's just pretty bad. We've got 3 Scotts on the call. Does everyone here have an iPhone? Is that what's going on?
No, I've logged in on the computer. It's going to shut down now. I'm just desperate to talk to you, Scott.
Oh, I know. You couldn't have just chatted me. All right, I'm going to unmute someone named Guest 10 because I'm a little concerned. This is probably someone evil. Someone named Guest 10 is dialed in. Guest 10, unnamed guest. Who are you?
That's me, Theon.
How's it going? Where are you calling from?
Calling from Colorado.
Yeah, and why are you up so late on a Friday night?
Because I have insomnia.
We had a number of people who have insomnia. We were talking earlier with Roy Osherow from Israel, the unit testing expert, and he's actually on the chat too. He's up at about 7 in the morning in Israel. His daughter kept him up all night, and he has followed us all the way over to here as well. I'm going to unmute a couple of more people. We've got John Sheehan and Ryan Farley on the phone. Ryan, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
This is interesting. I feel like I'm suddenly on a Leo Laporte podcast. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I must say more people know who Leo Laporte is than they know who I am. So I got to give Leo the props for that.
Well, was that the Ryan Farley that does a lot of Salesforce integration?
I think so. Ryan, are you there?
Yes, that's me.
This is nice. It's a nice little community we've got going here. People logged in.
It's amazing, though, 2009, and we can't find a decent place to do this.
It is a shame. You know, one thing we could do would actually be leave our homes and go to where people are, would be one idea that we could potentially, just a thought, might be a little out there, a little revolutionary, but, actually speaking to humans.
Well, the state of telephone support is really great.
That is true. That is true. I'm surprised we couldn't get the video thing working. I noticed that when we were trying this before, using a tool called TinyChat, we were using a Flash-based interface, and we were all trying to broadcast our video. I think they allow you to do 12 video slots, but the lag was just horrendous. And on Ustream, you could see me, but I could only see you via chat. Another guy who does this kind of stuff is Chris Perillo, also I think extremely famous for being famous, really. And he does this stuff. Does he use Ustream, or what does Chris use?
He streams everything on Ustream.
Does everything on Ustream? Oh yeah, I guess he's got three. He's actually live right now on Ustream with 308 people. I'm not even sure what he's doing right now, but I'm going to click on it and see what's going on here. People are chatting with this guy. He lives online, broadcasting live. He's got his giant, and he's got a whole chat thing on the bottom of the screen. People are watching Chris. He is sitting here with a glass of wine. This is really even sadder. Do you realize that we're in one tool talking about a geek in another tool? Really, ultimately, we are all just a bunch of tools at this point, so not too good. Hey, did anyone see the Codeplex announcement that we saw this week where Microsoft announced the creation of the Codeplex Foundation? Did you guys see that?
Yes.
Any thoughts about that? I know Roy Osherove had some opinions. Roy?
First of all, it was kind of news to me. I thought it was a good idea at first, but after reading Bellware's blog post, it gave me more thoughts about the various risks, and I'm especially concerned about the fact that it's a separate entity and that Microsoft seems to still, again, do everything on its own. It's like the not invented here syndrome. Instead of joining something that exists, Microsoft has to recreate everything from the beginning and to create its own identity and to actually put it inside Microsoft's belly instead of putting it out there. Well, at least it seems that way, that it's going to that direction. I think it's a good idea at the very least.
So you actually were concerned that it was a separate entity? You didn't think that was a good idea? Doesn't the independence of that entity equal a good thing?
Well, there are already existing independent entities. Why did Microsoft have to create another one of their own?
Well, that's a really good question. Again, I'm speaking only as Scott, not as not in the representative of Microsoft, and certainly not as anyone with any kind of power. But it seemed to me that you've got the Eclipse Foundation, which really supports Eclipse, and you've got the Apache Foundation, which supports Apache. Why wouldn't you want a foundation that was not tied to a particular product? That seemed like a good idea to me. I think that's the idea of the Codeplex Foundation.
Are there no foundations that are not related to a specific product?
I'm trying to think of foundations that are not specific to products. Anyone here think about any foundations that are not specific to a product?
And Codeplex, is Codeplex a product?
Codeplex isn't a product. Codeplex is just a name.
SourceForge.
SourceForge? Well, SourceForge, is that a foundation? Is that actually an open, is that OSI, of course. Is SourceForge an independent, like a non-profit, or is that a corporation?
I can't remember. I just thought I thought for a minute, I thought, is it SourceForge? But no, I take it back. I recall that.
Right. Well, there's the Free Software Foundation, right? FSF.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question. But see, that really supports GNU, right? So free software supports GNU, and Linux distribution. So that's a very good question. I think that Scott Bellware's article really kind of nailed it for me, though, because it gives .NET a place to live. It gives .NET projects a place to live. I think that if you get what I think of as kind of the N star stack moving over to Codeplex Foundation, then we could get some actual strength in numbers. We get like NHibernate and NUnit and N this and N that. That could be a pretty good thing.
Well, obviously it's better than what we have now. Everything is better than what we have now. The question is, could it have been even better than that? And that's what I'm not sure about. And I think that the fact that I'm not one of those big mainstream contributors to open source like Allende and stuff like that makes me understand less about this topic. But I think that as .NET developers, we all should know more about this topic. And the fact that most .NET developers don't really care about this announcement at all just shows how not ingrained it is in our culture. And I think
that's an excellent point.
So I think we should all be involved in this just to learn what it is, why it's important for us to know about it. And the fact that I can't even name those other foundations is not a good thing.
It's actually a shame, considering that we're some of the guys that care the most, but we're still struggling to figure this out. Now, there's a number of people who are making comments here in the chat scrolling by. One individual said that while the Apache Foundation started with Apache, it has lots of projects certainly underneath it, not just the web server, including Lucene. And also it's got things that aren't necessarily Java. They've got ports from Java as well. And then you've got another person indicates that SourceForge.net is owned and operated by SourceForge Incorporated, which is actually a publicly traded U.S. company. So that is interesting. We should is there anyone who knows about this kind of stuff? It's interesting around open source that so many people speak authoritatively. They make a lot of declarations that it is so, but they don't necessarily, there's no way to tell whether they're just talking or whether they know what they're talking about. We need to get like a Sam Ramsey or something like that to help break it down, because it changes so often that I personally have trouble keeping up with it.
Maybe there should be a whole podcast you can do and just get a few of those people in there and get some questions from the community.
Yeah, that is an excellent idea. People should feel free to email me at scottha@microsoft.com and make suggestions to about who they would want on like the ideal open source panel to get some of these questions answered. I can certainly pull in people from the Codeplex Foundation. One individual, of course, just made a very important point that we really can't emphasize enough, which is that Codeplex.com is not Codeplex.org. And a lot of people have complained about the naming of Codeplex, that it's too confusing. And personally, I think the .org and the .com top-level domain is pretty specific. We also point out that we've got Sarah Ford, who is the owner of Codeplex.com. She's on the advisory board, and her job is to make sure that that we stay separate. These are not Codeplex.com is a Microsoft thing, and you'll notice if you look at the licensing that the Codeplex Foundation owns the name Codeplex now, and they actually licensed it back to Codeplex.com, which is interesting. It'd be nice if we had a couple of people log in to the call here, and we can get some more people speaking. I think Jesse McCullough is on the phone. Let's see if he is next in the queue here to speak. We've got some folks in the queue. Who just came on there?
This is Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
On Twitter, I'm Coder Dennis.
Okay.
Right now, the only sponsor of the Codeplex Foundation, at least it shows up on the website, is Microsoft. I think some of these reactions that people are having might be pushed aside if there were other sponsors besides Microsoft. Do you know if that's something that's like our other companies going to be sponsoring?
If you take a look at exactly. If you take a look at my blog in the comments, Bill Staples, who is one of the Microsoft general managers, he's the general manager of kind of the web stack, made some comments where he wants to point out that this was a soft launch. It was a launch that we weren't 100% prepared, and we wanted to start small. We figured that in the interest of transparency, why not start small and say this is something that we're intending to do, as opposed to doing a bunch of stuff that was kind of hidden in the background. So the intent is, as I understand it, in the first 100 days to get an all-new board that is going to be less Microsoft, and have a chairman who is not Sam Ramsey. Sam Ramsey is the interim chairman for the first 100 days. So it's kind of one of those things where it launched with no projects, and it launched really in a very light way, and success shouldn't be based on what happened today, but success should be what happens in 100 days. If we're having this conversation like what the heck is it for, and we're doing this Christmas time, then we have a problem.
Yeah, I don't think it's a bad thing that Microsoft sponsors a foundation like this. I think that's great. I think people are having a really hard time letting Microsoft change. I mean, maybe they aren't, but I think people, I don't know. I think we should give Microsoft a chance to change. I think a lot of people just aren't.
That's interesting. Someone's going to think that you're a shill. I've set you up to say that. That's actually a very interesting thing to say, that people won't let Microsoft change. Well, they want to, like a gentleman named Soul Hunter just said, that people hang on to a lot of the old hate. Remember, we saw recently that Linus said that hating Microsoft was a bit of a disease, and I think that is definitely true. People, Mendicant just said, let's get Mendicant on the phone here, because he just made an interesting point about giving people a lot of power. Mendicant, are you there on the phone?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead and say again what you just said in the chat.
Oh, people are worried because everyone sees Microsoft as large and all-powerful and all that sort of jazz. So now, by having control of this foundation, you're arguably giving them more power by putting all this IP and property and code under their control for as long as they're on the board. So I mean, like, I can see why people would be wary to say, even though, it's not possible to put Hibernate on there right now, but to put a project like Hibernate on there, technically they could basically just take it and run with it. Was my first reaction when I first saw this.
I also think that over time, trust is going to be something that we as a company are going to break down in terms of, I think in the past there's been a few minor issues which have, kind of built that momentum, and I think creating safe havens like this is essentially, taking another step forward in sort of breaking down that antitrust sort of attitude that's across the community sometimes.
And I mean, like, from my point of view, 5 years ago, I couldn't stand Microsoft. I, wouldn't run their operating systems. I wouldn't run, anything. But being involved on the .NET side of things and seeing the change and seeing the direction, kind of, they're trying to make the right moves. I've really, kind of lightened up on that a lot, but there's more that needs to be changed, but it's not going to happen overnight, right?
Yeah. Rob, the janitor, just made a comment I want to hear him say.
I was going to say, there's people who hate Microsoft to hate Microsoft, no matter what they do. There's a guy, as I understand it, who's not allowed to participate in certain code camp events as a speaker in Boise because all he does is rant about how much he hates Microsoft. I came from the Unix, Linux world. I started .NET in mono. I didn't own a Windows license, and I did it just kind of on my own through work, and now I'm a full-time .NET developer. And
well, let's hear from guest 94, who's just come into the queue. Let's go ahead and unmute you. Are you there, guest 94?
Yeah, it's me, Rob Connery. How are you?
Oh, hi, Rob. How are you, Rob?
I'm doing good, Mr. Scott. It's good to see you. John Sheehan just pinged me on Skype. Skype. Said, hey, you got to get on this call. I said, all right, sure, why not?
That is so funny. And you came on and you could not actually change your name. You figured out how to get into the queue, and you called yourself Guest 94. So sneaky.
It's cryptic. It's code.
What do you think about the announcement, Rob?
I think it's awesome. I think it's great.
But you're a Microsoft shill.
Not anymore. Well,
the
interesting thing about it is that I can speak rather freely now, and I will. That it was it was something that was fought for long and hard, and I was in some initial discussions. I wasn't any part of making it happen, but I was in some initial discussions about it, and I remember thinking at the time when the thing came up, yeah, right, but I got to say, it happened, and kudos and congratulations to everyone that made it happen. I think it's interesting. Now, as to what's going to happen in the future with it, who knows? But I think it's an opportunity, as Bellware put today, and I can't believe everyone's saying this today. I can't believe I'm quoting Bellware.
I thought that was pretty funny. I saw a number of people on Twitter that were saying, here, I'm going to retweet Bellware. But I think that Bellware's got some good points. We've got another guy who just asked to be in the queue here called The One. Are you there?
Hey guys, I have a quick question. With having just glanced over the blog post, can you give me any idea of what this foundation is actually going to oversee?
So by having, as I understand it, as having the organization be its own entity, it is a separately, kind of wholly owned thing. It's not controlled by Microsoft. Microsoft can't tell it what to do. This would allow open source projects to assign their copyrights to it. They would get the resources of the foundation. The foundation can is kind of we're kind of drawing a circle around a bunch of people who think the same and giving it a name.
Okay, great, thanks.
And the idea, I think, is to bring those open source projects under, as Scott Bellware says, under its auspices. Let's see what Scott Kuhn thinks about that. Scott, does this do anything, or is this just a press release?
So there's a couple of things that I think Sam Irby had a good point that he was hoping they would follow the Eclipse or Apache model, which is more that they assign the licenses and the contributions are actually owned by the foundation. And I think from that respect, the foundation then takes any legal hits or is responsible for finagling around any patent issues or anything like that. I think that would be a good thing because that's the number one complaint people have about using OSS is that, how do I know? How can I vet its pedigree? How do I know that I'm not going to get sued for patent infringement and blah 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 and all of that? So I think if they get to that point where they're actually accepting the contributions and distributing licenses or taking licenses, I think it's going to be a really good thing. I'd also like to see a little bit more, and I talked about this a little bit, or Lauren Clooney, I think, had mentioned this a little bit when I was venting on Twitter about the foundation, that there may be some possible financial support, grants, etc., coming in. Maybe there was. Of course, none of this is finalized because it sounds like they're at the toddler stage. They've just figured out how to walk in this open source land, and they're not steady yet.
We're clearly behind. I mean, it's nice that this is happening, but I think a lot of people have made very valid points, and they said that it really should have happened years ago.
Hey everybody, this is Scott coming at you from another place and time. Summer is peaking, and our friends at Telerik are working at full steam. They've just released the Q2 volume of the Telerik Premium Collection for .NET, the biggest release yet. It's packed with new things that'll excite anyone who's got to do anything with .NET development, starting with Silverlight and the introduction of the first commercial 3D chart in the market. It's developed as a true vector 3D, which gives you nice performance and rich capabilities with rotation and animations. Also, the Silverlight Scheduler, which is packed with even more features than the first version. Telerik's flagship, RAD controls for ASP.NET Ajax, grows in this release, not only with 4 new controls, but also with new productivity tools. There's the new Visual Style Builder, an online application that allows you to visually modify skins or even design new ones with just point and click. If that's not enough, they've added a completely new product, a free testing framework powered by Art of Test for automating Ajax and Silverlight-rich internet applications. I'm short on time, so I can't give you all the new features and enhancements in Telerik reporting, Open Access ORM, or WinForms, but I encourage you to check out all of these products at telerik.com. Thanks.
Fabio from NHibernate is brought up a point here where he says that he really needs someone to protect the NHibernate copyright. And other people have made the comments, like John Clayton just said, is this Codeplex Foundation going to actually help commercial software developers use open source, or is it just going to give them warm fuzzies to make people feel comfortable? Let's see. We've got Scott Reynolds is back on. Scott?
Yeah, I think warm fuzzies maybe, and actually helping get people using open source would be ideal. One of the biggest complaints a lot of us in the community have had for a long time is that it's, we do have a lot of great open source projects in the .NET space, and it's hard to get them legitimized, in kind of the larger corporate development world, and Microsoft never seemed to be doing much to help that, and rather than help, they would often reinvent the wheel and send out MS Test for the big corporate dev shops. So what I'm hoping we'll see out of this, either by actual action on the Codeplex Foundation, or even just having the association, is that we get some of that legitimizing factor so that open source can get into a wider corporate development world.
Now, that's an interesting point about corporate development. One of the things that I think got us kind of in trouble when we put the blogs out there, and when I put my post out, is I use the word commercial. It seems like if you say the word commercial in the same sentence as open source, then you are kind of Satan's minion. I think that's, people say, oh, good, he's commercial. It's not a good idea. But I spent many years working at a banking company trying to get open source okayed to run at large banks. I'm interested in folks on the call about what they think about it. Is it difficult, and have they had trouble? And if you could say, well, there's a foundation out there that can help us navigate the licensing of open source code in commercial projects, would that be easier? We have another guy in the queue here, FD Fry. Are you there, sir, FD Fry?
Yeah, I'm here, actually. I was actually going to speak directly to that commercial question. I find it that one of the challenges is, handling the licensing of utilizing open source, but another challenge is just, getting buy-in that it's, up to speed with the other commercially available products. I mean, Microsoft specifically, I think, has a lot of word-of-mouth reputation about having, magic, whether it's, a team of developers that are able to, tweak every last drop of performance out of a new feature that has never been seen before. 200, 500 developers that are locked away in some cave somewhere, I mean, I think that open source is so much more transparent. We can see the total number of contributors and things like that. But we also, that just can't stack up against the hidden secrets that people say that happen to surround Microsoft releases straight out.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that? Do you guys think that having the foundation is just Microsoft trying not to look evil, but they are in fact still evil? Or is this back to that point about, is this for selfish reasons? Do you guys think that there's something underneath this, or is this an honest attempt to do something right?
I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt here and see where it goes, and not ascribe any ulterior motives yet. I'd like to think that this is actually a legitimate attempt to do some good.
And I agree. I think they have a lot to gain by pushing adoption of .NET technologies and other technologies in general by getting more people involved. I think they've got good reasons to be completely selfless in this act.
Okay, let's hear what Roy Osherov has to say.
Yeah, I think Microsoft is. I think there are two phases there. I think there's a higher up level where it's purely an internal interest of Microsoft to be more open to open source, to get more business and get more people interested, because that's where the wind is blowing. But that higher up authority gave the baton to people who actually do care and who are going to do good. So I think we're going to get the good out of what was initially just a self-interest.
I can make a comment here. I don't know if being unmuted is good enough, or should I wait?
Sure. Just say your name first.
Okay, this is Saul Hunter, Ken. And what I was going to say was, I think that this kind of points out to part of the problem with moving to the open source community, in the sense that, you hear a lot of stuff about open source is good for business, that we should, be open to the open source stuff, because in addition to everything else, it's going to help us make money and make a good product and whatever. But when someone takes them up on that, when Microsoft makes a move, there's always this question: are they doing it for pure motive, which is supposed to be better, or are they doing it in their self-interest? And I guess my point is, we've been told that those are the same things, that we can do well by doing good. But then when you do that, it's not good enough. Like, if you're not a starving artist working for the good of everybody but yourself, that suddenly every move you make just never measures up. And I think Microsoft's getting that heat. That are they doing it for the right reasons, or are they doing it to make money and gain customers? But aren't those the right reasons?
Any business wants to make money. That's the point of having a business. And it's okay to want to make money. It's okay to support an open source while you want to make money. I don't think there's a problem with that. And I agree there is a high, but this is Roy, by the way, I agree there is a high anti-commercial, and I feel that, having worked for a commercial-related tool company that does have open source-related tools that compete against it at some level, there is a high level of antitrust from the community in your wanting to be good and wanting to make money at the same time. So I fully understand Microsoft in that regard.
Yeah, I like to think of this myself. I mean, I like open source, but I like open source in the way that I like free Legos. I've always felt that the things that should be open sourced are the Legos of some appropriate size. When I was working at the banks, putting in large retail banking systems, I was thrilled to find things of an appropriate size like Log4Net, an NUnit, and all of the the N stack. But I don't think that I would want to open source the intellectual property in a large online banking system. I think it's nice when Legos are appropriately licensed and of a right size, and then you build something awesome with it. I wouldn't expect for someone to build something amazing and then suddenly open source that until it fit the community, until the size and until that had become commoditized. I guess that's what I'm saying. I don't think logging is impressive. I don't think ORM is such an amazing thing that someone should have to go and patent the heck out of it. Those are the kinds of things that should just be. They should just work. So do you guys feel that the size of most open source projects, the scope of what they try to solve, is appropriately sized right now?
I think a lot of these groups take on, we tend to judge the entirety of open source by the 5 or 6 or 7 projects that have really done something big and done it really, really well, the Apaches and whatever. And certainly those are fantastic projects, and I use them and I love them. But most open source, there's nothing magic about the open source sauce. A lot of those projects take on something and fail badly. And I think it's because they try and bite off more than they can chew, and then there's a lot of infighting and who's going to do the architecture. I think you can only get so much effort out of people who are working for free before they have to make a living somehow.
A couple of points that I want to answer that are going by on the chat here, because while we're having this conversation in audio, we've got people going on live in the chat. We had Fabio from Hibernate asked the question about licensing, and as I understand it, and again, I'm just speaking as Scott, so I very, very well could make a mistake, but there's nothing in the Codeplex Foundation, there's nothing in Codeplex.org that is specific to a particular license. I would even go so far to say that Codeplex.org doesn't prefer a license. It doesn't even prefer MSPL. So I think it would welcome projects that are under other licenses. I'm sure that BSD would be a very appropriate license that could come under Codeplex.org. And while Codeplex may lean towards .NET projects, I don't think that Codeplex is about necessarily .NET projects. Just like the Apache Foundation does target towards LAMP, but there are other things. And remember, of course, that Codeplex.org is not Codeplex.com. And I think the sooner that we get a chairman, a head of the Codeplex Foundation, who is going to be a non-Microsoft person in the open source space, the better that we're going to get. I think that the better things are going to be. We've got Bob, the janitor, who's sitting in the queue here. Let's see if we can unmute Bob and see what Bob has to say. You there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm here. So I came out of a very heavy Unix Linux shop and came into this Windows shop, and it just blew me away that they were so anti-open source. I couldn't use any open source libraries, no matter what they were. I had to actually fight to get them to allow me to download NUnit. And it blew me away that we had such, oh no, it's open source, you can't touch it. Oh, it's Microsoft? Oh yeah, whatever. So I actually started...
Now, that's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point, because interestingly enough, a lot of people wanted to use use jQuery even inside of Microsoft. And then when Microsoft came out and said, "Hey, we're going to, quote unquote, release jQuery," a thing that was already released, but basically by wrapping our large arms around jQuery and giving it a virtual hug, that made it okay for jQuery to be used by open source. Hopefully that's and I would have to say also that. Actually, let me rather than saying it, let me ask you guys: don't you feel more comfortable using an Apache or an Eclipse or a product that is under a foundation than you do picking up a piece of source that's just sitting on Codeplex.com, written by some random dude who you've never heard of? Or do you not make any differentiation between a project that is under the auspices of a foundation? I'm interested. Let's hear the answer to that. Let me unmute Mendicant there. What do you think about that?
This is Mendicant again. I'm coming from a place that we're very heavy into open source, and to me, a foundation doesn't really matter. What matters more is the reputation of the project. We'll try stuff out, but it's a lot easier to find a good project and be comfortable using it when you see other people talking about it and saying, this is great. Like, we're using AutoMapper now, which is pretty new, and it took us a while to really kind of finally go and check it out. But, you see a lot of people saying, hey, this is great. You feel a lot better about downloading it, whether or not it's a part of a foundation.
Okay. Let's see if we can get, I think Joe Pruitt had an interesting comment. Let's unmute Joe and see what he's got to say. Are you there, Joe?
Yeah, I'm here now, guys. How's it going?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a couple comments coming across. I think coming from a corporate standpoint, you had made the point about somebody more likely to go with an Apache or somebody supported by a larger foundation, and I think that depends on the size of the project and the components that you're using. If you're using a big framework, probably yes, you want something that's got especially with how embedded it's going to be in your projects, right? Smaller components where you can get the source and logging utilities, things like that are critical to these applications, not necessarily.
Interesting point. We've got a Wolfbite who is in the queue here. Let's unmute Wolfbite and see what Wolfbite has to say. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what do these foundations actually do to ensure the quality of these projects? Why would projects under a particular foundation be any better than one that was done by a guy in his backyard?
Okay, you're having a heck of a time. It sounds like you're on a SIP phone, but I heard you say that you wanted to know that why is this particular product better under a foundation than under another? Is there a differentiation between projects that are under no foundation, or whether something that has suddenly been brought into the Codeplex universe, the Codeplex.org universe, is that a better project or a more supportable project? You'll be able to, as a person who has an open source project, assign the copyright over to the foundation. If Phil Hack decided that he wanted to take the subtext project and he could assign the copyright of that over to the Codeplex Foundation, and then they would own that, and then he would get a license back. Ryan Farley is in the queue here to speak.
Yeah, I was just going to mention on the whole question of whether or not it brings more validity to a project that's supported by a foundation rather than just something that's hosted out there on Codeplex. I think as developers we're more open to use open source things in the software that we build, more so than a typical user of that software might be. And example of Firefox, part of the Mozilla. I think that it has a lot of growth because it's supported by a foundation rather than something that somebody wrote that's just hosted out there on SourceForge, for example.
Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that's a little bit difficult about this, the creation of this foundation, is that because it was, as they call it, a soft launch, it was it really left a lot more questions than answers. I think that when I was looking through the FAQ myself, I would have liked to have a lot more clarity around, well, what do I do now? And are there going to be monthly calls? And how can I get involved? And how do I get my project to be supported and be under the auspices of the foundation? I think that hopefully people are obviously interested. We're sitting here talking about it, so it must be a topic that people are interested in. But in the coming weeks, we'll start to have some additional transparency about what's going on. We'll find out who other advisors and other members of the board of directors are going to be, and then start hearing about what projects are going to join up. I'd love to see some of the big name projects, the NHibernates and the XUnits and NUnits, start to get involved, so that someone could point at the Codeplex Foundation and just by saying, "Oh yeah, don't they have NHibernate?" Yeah, there's a lot more people are involved in NHibernate because of the fact that they're in the foundation now.
Hey Scott, can you address the issue regarding focus on .NET technologies? Because all the examples you gave are .NET based. Is there?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Fronting with some non.NET based technology. I didn't get from the whole FAQ and things like that where the focus of the foundation is going to be with technology based.
Again, speaking only as Scott, as I understand it, Microsoft created the foundation because they thought that there was a missing piece out there, that a lot of existing foundations are there to basically support an existing foundation, and they didn't want to create kind of the Windows Foundation or the Visual Studio Foundation, but they did have an interest in helping commercial companies use open source. And as someone who's worked really only in commercial companies, I've never actually worked for what you would call an open source company. I've always worked at companies where just mentioning open source got us afraid. Being able to call a foundation or have a foundation assist us and say, this license is compatible with your business goal, and if you use software under these licenses, or if you license your software in this way, or being able to explain dual licenses, that we might be able to use more open source software in commercial projects. I also think that as a Microsoft employee, and I know this, and I'd be interested in if there's any Microsoft employees on the call right now, that I want to work on open source projects. And you probably know as people who either are in the Microsoft universe or you orbit the Microsoft universe that Microsoft is notoriously picky about what employees, if any, they allow to work on open source projects. They really prefer that if you're working for Microsoft, you not be doing open source. I think, in my opinion, that the foundation represents the beginning of a change, so that somebody working on some project at Microsoft, let's say that they're working on a photo editor at Microsoft, because it's not like we haven't got enough of those. If that person wants to work on NHibernate, and NHibernate has nothing to do with the photo editor, and it's two different pieces of technology, two different pieces of intellectual property, that there's no reason that someone couldn't be able to work in their spare time and donate their time, basically, even as a Microsoft employee, to this not-for-profit entity, this separate entity, that they could potentially have their employee agreement set up such that I can work on my photo editor at my job at Microsoft, and I can work on NHibernate at night, and it's okay. And imagine if kind of Microsoft released the bonds of all of these developers at Microsoft, potentially, and I'm just speculating here, to think about what we could do if more Microsoft employees, good engineers, could start working on open source projects. I think that would be pretty cool. This is my belief, and this is my hope at where the direction things will go. But again, I'm only on the board of advisors. I'm not on the board of directors, and I think you guys realize the difference between directing something and advising. Advisors sit in the back seat and scream while the car swerves out of control, and directors typically have control of the wheel.
Scott, can I ask a question?
Scott.
Let's hear the first guy who spoke.
That was me. I was just going to ask what your personal stance is on things like Nerd Dinner or Baby Smash, or things that you work on that are more along the lines of samples, but still have some of your personal. I mean, how do you feel about that? Releasing it, not releasing it, licensing, that kind of thing.
Well, I try to release everything that I work on as MSPL, and there's also some talk about a new rule inside of Microsoft where, to make it easier to release code, sometimes Microsoft employees will release small samples and find it difficult to go through the legal hoops. But as I understand it, that if it's under 1,000 lines of code, then we can call it a sample, and a Microsoft employee can potentially release less than 1,000 lines of code without having to worry about the licensing, because that is about the size of a reasonable sample. For larger things, I just release as much as I can MSPL, and that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to make money. Honestly, if I turned Baby Smash, babysmash.com, by the way, into an open source educational toolkit, I would think it'd be really awesome. I could build a whole community, build a corporation around it, and we could make I could make the speakandspell.net, and make lots of money. But it seemed to me like releasing things like that as MSPL is a better idea. But remember, back to the discussion of Lego sizes. Both Nerd Dinner and Baby Smash, you called them sample-sized. You could call them, medium-sized, Lego-sized. I've seen people extend both of those applications and make them into more interesting things. Whether or not they choose to open source the thing that they derive from that is really up to them. But I don't know. If I had a really great idea, if I had a Twitter-sized idea, I would probably go and talk to legal and see that I could turn it into a commercial thing. And I would hope that you would do the same as well.
So Scott, I've got a question here. Scott,
okay.
So let's look at this from the other stated goal of Codeplex.org, is to help facilitate not only developers working on open source, but also to help corporations to use open source. So shouldn't one of their targets be Microsoft itself? What's one of the first things you install on any Windows machine if you want to do any kind of graphics manipulation, and you don't have Photoshop? It's probably Paint.net, right? So why can't you put Paint.net on the DVD instead of including MS Paint? I mean, MS Paint.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah. So just to make sure that everyone heard it, you're saying that why isn't Paint.net Paintbrush, right? Why didn't it literally replace it? Why it's that good? Why isn't it a replacement?
Right. So, and most of the arguments I've heard have been, well, we can't vet the pedigree, or we don't own the IP, and blah blah blah. We don't want to take the hit, and so maybe one of the first things that this foundation can do is see if they can actually get more open source shipping on Microsoft DVDs. jQuery was a good first step. Let's see if we can get some more in there.
That's a really good point. I know that there are a lot of people who are interested in the Codeplex Foundation at Microsoft at the highest levels, and I hope that we'll hear more and more from those people. I'm only an advisor, and I've heard general managers and different people talk. If we start hearing from vice presidents and stuff who can start speaking to their interest in this, maybe the foundation will provide a bridge for Microsoft to do just those things, right? I mean, Linux distributions can fill their DVDs up with great open source products. Now, Paint.net, in the example that you gave, is not in fact an open source project. Paint.net recently went closed source, but I think the point is still there. Now, someone just said, Hibernate versus Entity Framework, how will Microsoft found a project that is going against the core technologies? You're basically asking the question of that, if Hibernate decided to come over to Codeplex.org, wouldn't Microsoft be funding something that was going against something that they're competing against? This is the kind of the fundamental point, and we should probably get ready to end the call at this point, which is that Codeplex.org is not Microsoft. It's Microsoft seed money. And certainly, Microsoft is interested in pushing it in a certain direction, but Microsoft can only push Codeplex Foundation as far as it has control over the board of directors and things like that. I think that I would like to see a world where the Codeplex Foundation pushes back a little bit, gets powerful enough, gets interesting enough that it can put a little pressure on Microsoft to change things. I think that an independent foundation is the only way that this is going to work. So I can't stress enough that as someone who's watching this from the inside, that I would really like to see it be independent. And it's all out in the open. If you see something happening around the Codeplex Foundation that you don't think is transparent, then you should sound the alarm. As the public and as interested individuals, you should talk to the governance and the people in charge of the foundation and say, I don't think that's cool. Does that help? Balance.
It makes sense to me. I think one of the reasons that Codeplex is there, especially the .org version, is to sort of give Microsoft the freedom to not duck those questions, but the answer, it's an impossible answer for a corporation to go, will we fund someone doing something against our core technologies? I don't even think the stakeholders, the stockholders should deal with it. So by spinning this off to a .org, I think their definitive answer to that question is, we're going to let it happen, but we certainly don't need to directly pour our dollars into it. And I think that's a reasonable answer for a corporation.
Yeah, and I hope that you have HP and you have IBM and everyone else who wants to get involved and fund. When you have a healthy foundation, you've got a foundation that has funding from multiple locations. Just like when you have a healthy company, you have a company that's making money from many places, so that the money stops. If Microsoft stops funding the Codeplex Foundation, that it's got funding from other places to keep going and keep doing what it means to do.
Hey, Scott, there's a big call for people to get involved. How do you recommend that individuals get involved outside of just talking about it?
Until it becomes clearer and the website starts getting filled out, because as I understand it, they're moving into offices and doing stuff like that, getting servers and all these kinds of things, getting infrastructure. I think you email Sam Ramsey and you email the email addresses of the people on the board of directors. So if you want to get involved, start by emailing your manifestos to them. I think that's what I would do. If you email me, I'm going to just add them to the email address. That's what I'm going to do when it comes to the Codeplex Foundation.
Cool.
All right, well, this has been another episode of Hanselminutes, the strangest episode ever, as we hopped from social networking site to social networking site. And now, as Firefox begins to lock up, I'm going to see if I can push the end button, and hopefully this has been recorded and will be up on my website tomorrow. Thanks, everyone, for participating. I really appreciate it.